How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Real Northern Bass. Now, it's been a minute since I did a video covering electronics and how we use them to find different areas that we feel are the best spots to fish, and specifically on bigger bodies of water. So I'm going to take you along on an adventure as I try to break down a lake that I have almost never fished here in New Hampshire, Lake Winnisquam. This is a great example of how your electronics can really come in handy to help you understand what it is out there for potential to fish, especially in a lake like this where there is nothing overly obvious other than a handful of areas. So my goal is not only to show you how to go about tackling this from my own perspective, first time ever truly actually fishing this. This also benefits the high school team that I'm the assistant coach on. They made it through their qualifying tournament and they made it to the state championship, which is here in about a week. So I've got one day to try and figure out what these fish want. And I'm going to use a lot of side imaging, down imaging, 2D sonar, looking at my map to really hone in those areas I've identified that have a good amount of potential. Try and stick a few fish, make sure they're the right size and obviously the right species are there, and take it from there. So let's see what we can find here and hopefully teach you guys a lesson along the way. So let's start with the first and most obvious thing you should do when you go out here. And obviously when you go to any new body of water, I would assume that you're going to do your homework ahead of time. You're going to look at depth charts, even if it's just the night before, to get an idea of your starting points. I've already done that. And as you can tell, I'll go through this a little bit. I'm out here at the boat launch. There's a couple of very obvious spots. Out here on the western side of the lake near Keyser Point, there's a couple of other spots. But as we go further up the lake, it becomes less obvious as to what obvious spots you have because there's so few. You got a couple of submerged humps out here that are a little deep for my taste, given what we've seen this year, but worth noting for future reference. You get further north, you get a couple more humps, you got some shallow areas, and you have sustained areas of shallow water where you've got 30 to 40 feet in this trench. And the further north you go, the more limited it becomes. There's another nice hump up here. So for my starting point, I'm actually gonna go look for largemouth. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna go all the way down south. It helps if I zoom so it gets a little bit easier. So we're up here, we're gonna go all the way down into this area. Beyond the bridge, there's a lot of no wake. If memory serves correct, there is some submerged vegetation in this area. So we're gonna go out there and side image and look for that first. Eventually working our way down in the South Bowl, where there is a much more consistent areas in large areas where I'm more likely to find the kind of vegetation I'm looking at, which is up here, usually pond cabbage. So that's what we're gonna go do first, and then later as the sun comes up, change things around, we're gonna go out and look for schooling bait balls and smallmouth that are hanging out around them. Ideally, we'll find them near any sort of cover structure, and that's gonna make it easier, not only for the high schoolers, but it'll make it easier for you to understand kind of the things we're looking at. Right now, it is the last Sunday of September. I believe it's the 29th. So the water temperature has started to drop. I know that a lot of that shallower vegetation is going to start dying off. The largemouth are going to move around and start going from the vegetation they were holding on to any hard structure nearby for that first immediate move. So that's kind of where my head's at, where I'm going to go looking for the largemouth up here first. Then we'll go back and start looking for other hard structure or maybe some leftover, deeper perch grass, we like to call it up here. It's really skunky, smelly grass. Look around there, see if we can't find yellow perch, and if not, then we're going to look off the steep end of drop-offs and see if we can't find yellow perch and or smelt and just work around that. That's the general game plan. Let's go look for some largemouth. So right off the bat, all right, we're heading down. I'm gonna start looking for things that I normally might not want to look at, but given the exact kind of area I'm in right now, where it's coming out of this deeper water and coming up to narrows, plus we have current going through here, it makes sense to stop and take a quick look. As I mean, this is a huge no idle zone for about a mile. So, no wake zone. So it's worthwhile to at least take a quick peek while I'm going through here, because why not? Why else would, otherwise you'd just be wasting your time. Right off the bat, you can see right over here, that's actually a big high point of rocks, and it drops off deep on the left side, a little bit higher here in the middle. I'm just gonna mark that all for, everybody's kind of got their own rhyme or reason. A diamond is general area of interest. And then when I see things like that, where it's an individual boulder, I'll give that a rock, not a plane. And I'm going to go through and continue to look at things like that. That's something that I always like to try and keep in mind when you're going through and looking for new areas to fish, is you may have an idea of where it is you want to go, but that doesn't mean you should completely overlook what you're traversing over, especially in this case where I have no option. I have to idle through here. I might as well make the most of it. And in this case, I'm already finding some things that I think are going to be interesting, especially given this particular spot where the main current flow is coming through. As to how much current, no idea. Doesn't matter, just knowing that this is where the current primarily flows through. Everything flows from north to south. You never know. So I'll circle back on this. But I can see over here on the right, there's some, that's vegetation because it's not very well defined with a lot of shadows behind it. It's what I would call fuzzy. Anytime I see anything fuzzy, that indicates to me that's vegetation. Now, side imaging, as great as it is, does have its limitations when you're really kind of trying to hone in on the very finer details of what it is that you're seeing. But with enough hours on the water, you start to get an idea of what it is. And then the added beauty of having Mega 360 is I can drop that down over the top, and now I get that top-down look. And especially in the case of vegetation, that's extremely important for me because I can then see if there's any rocks in there that are a little harder to find with side imaging and even at times forward-facing sonar. But that's more limited in shallower water applications. A little bit deeper, because that isn't just looking forward, it's also looking down a lot better. I can also see other things like rocks inside the vegetation. But if I'm up in, say, 10 feet or shallower and the vegetation's pretty thick, it's really, really hard to see those rocks buried in the vegetation. Mega 360, on the other hand, that can see those things inside of there. And then from there, you can use your forward-facing sonar to really line up your cast and even take a poke around and see if anybody's home. You don't need it. We've done extremely well over the past few years with just Mega 360, utilizing it exactly like that. Side imaging, okay, general area of interest. Mega 360 over the top. Now I see exactly everything that's here in detail and exactly where it's positioned from the boat and the distance from the boat. So yeah, as much as forward-facing sonar is awesome and very helpful, not entirely necessary when you're structure fishing. Definitely helps. Open water fishing makes all the difference in the world, especially if they're up off the bottom. If they're on the bottom, you can actually do really well with just Mega 360. Side note, I know forward-facing sonar is a hot topic for a lot of people. There's a lot of ignorance around it, but that's just at least my take on it and how it can help you in these, where you don't have to entirely rely upon it. That's gonna be a big aspect of what it is I discuss as we continue to go through here and look at more structure out here. All right, enough of that. We're back to looking for largemouth spots and potentially smallmouth spots, because the depth in here in this large no-wake area between the bridge and the island, there is deep enough holes that it would make sense there could be smallmouth here, but I'm not gonna look for those yet. I'm focused on largemouth. So as you can see from the map, if we take a quick look at this, I'm gonna idle over towards this side. I am gonna run back up lake later, so I will go up the other side. Right now I'm going down the west shoreline. When I come back up, I'll go up the east side. I'm maximizing my time while I'm out here. And you can see there is quite a bit of contour changes out here. So we're gonna try and make the most of that. Go back to our side imaging. So right there, that's a rock. And I wish I was paying better attention because I almost missed it. It's little things like that that can make all the difference in the world when you're out here scouting an otherwise featureless shoreline. And one side note on my side imaging, I typically don't like leaving it at 120 feet. You start to lose a lot of resolution on what you're looking at. But in this case, when I'm trying to cover a ton of water in a very short amount of time, I want to see as much as I can. I know that right now on this whole right side, I'm looking at a bunch of vegetation. You can see by this kind of hairy shadowing on the back, that's all grass. So I'm just going to make a couple of tall grass line notes here so I know that this is the stretch that I really want to take a look at later. Now it does help that also on my sonar and my down imaging that you can also better see what that vegetation looks like. So you don't just need the side imaging to kind of give you an idea. All these marks, that's fish below us right there, all those white marks. You want to get an idea as what fish look like when they're suspended as you're driving over them with side imaging, that right there is it. So I can see, again, I'm just looking for anything kind of off the beaten path. In this case, Winnisquam is fished so heavily, I'm not really sure there's any secrets here, but you never know. So that could very well be something interesting to take a look at later. I'll mark it as a rock because it looks like a couple of rocks. It could be like an old mooring anchor for all I know. Doesn't matter, it's hard structure. That's the way I see it. So I want to be able to come back and look at that. That's incredibly important, finding like literally any hard structure that's close to areas that you know fish should be in, because even a cinder block that someone lost that they had used as an anchor can hold smallmouth. It's crazy what they'll hold on to. That right there is a log. So we are going to give that, I don't have like a good log thing, so I call it chicken feet. I'm not really sure what that is. It looks like branches, but chicken feet it is. We got more vegetation off to the right, and this is all good. I'm currently sitting in 10 feet of water. I have a strong feeling based on everything else that I've seen so far where I've been fishing, you know, other places, that those largemouth are still kind of shallow. All the young of the year have moved up. There's a lot of bait that's moved up. All the bass are just gonna follow. So I'm going for a mix of whatever vegetation is left behind, which in this case, there's plenty, so that's a good sign. And any hard structure that's either inside of it or immediately adjacent to it, preferably really, really shallow and really deep. Not necessarily really deep, but on the deep side of where that is. There you go, how about that? That is a beautiful isolated rock pile. And that is the kind of thing I'm looking for. That's not a plane, but whatever, that works. Where off here, we're not that far from the vegetation out to that. That's a nice, good holding point. You got a big high point here of all riprap rock. There is another specific thing I'm looking for on top of that, where you got a rock on top of the rock pile. It's a little bit bigger. It differentiates itself from everything else on that. It is unique. It provides better cover than the rest of that overall mound has to offer. Therefore, that is your highest probability of success to target something like that specifically. Not too far off, you got more down logs. Those will always tend to hold fish at some point in the year. I'm just gonna make it a rock because the chicken feet thing is kind of weird to look at, I'm not gonna lie. And from there, we're just gonna continue to go through and look for more stuff. That may be a log directly below me, but I'm not entirely sure. That could be a fish that was swimming along with me as well. It's directly below the boat, and I do see coming back quite a few boomerangs here, so there is actually quite a number of fish down there. What they were, no idea. Remains to be seen. We'll have to come back and scope them, try and catch a few and see what we got. As you can see on the sonar, the other thing we have here, and really something else we're looking for, again, double duty. I'm looking for largemouth spots, but I'm gonna make the most of my time while I'm stuck idling. That's bait. All of that right coming through here. If we come back to just regular sonar to give you guys more to look at, you've got the drop off we came down, you got fish, 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 any of those solid boomerangs, bait, all bait. When it becomes really, really cloudy like that, that to me tells bait and or schools of smaller fish. So that's something to keep in mind as we come through here. And based on the water temp, I'm gonna say that the thermocline is probably right about 30 degrees as well. If that was a much more consistent line, you can actually see the thermocline when your settings are just right on your sounder and your transducers. There you go, there's another good fish right there. So let's come back so we can actually get side imaging as well, because that's what I'm most curious about. All this white, sporadic white, that also gives me a pretty confident idea that I'm seeing a lot more bait there as well off to the left and right side of the boat. Now, looking at the map, I will zoom in a little bit on it so you can see a little bit more. We're gonna come over a very subtle but defined submerged point. Right here, you got more riprap rock. That I'm just gonna give, this is my, you gotta find kind of your own deal, but like the diamond is, I use it as general area of interest or large hump, large rocky hump. There's nothing special about it in the sense there's no one individual big boulder on it. It's just a big hump. So there could be fish on top of it or all around it or adjacent to it. Diamond for me just makes my life easier, and that's just what I've always correlated it with. We come down a little further, now we're getting into this narrow neck between the mainland and the island. You can see we got even more rock out here, so I'm going to give that another diamond at the high point because I don't see anything in particular except for maybe right there. That's another individual rock, and with another one near it. I can keep a mental note of that, so I'm just gonna let that ride as it is. I kind of like this off to the right where you got those like undulations in the sand. That's what that looks like to me. So that's all pretty clean, but then even right there, there's an individual rock and I'm liking the look of that. So you just never know. It's one of those, you will come out and look at something like this and mark 1,000 different things that could look good. And you're lucky if, say, 30% of them actually are worthwhile, that they will hold fish at that given time. It's worth marking everything because fish are gonna hold to structure differently at different depths at different times of the year. So just because you're marking things that can't help you today, they can help you another day. So I will mark a ton of things that, even though it has absolutely no relevance whatsoever for what I'm trying to do today and this coming weekend for the high school team, again, you just gotta maximize your time. I got one day to be out here, might as well mark everything I see. All right, let's go up shallower and see if we can't find some of that vegetation. Well, I didn't make it far, but what I'm seeing right here is a nice break from 30 down to 15. So let's take a quick gander while we're here. Side image around a little bit. see what's on the break, what's down off the break, what's on top of it. That knuckle is what I like to call it. See how sharp that rise was? Going from 30 up to now 10 feet. I'm already on top of it, so I have to turn because I want to get my boat actually just off the side of this a little bit. And because it's so shallow, look at this, I'm already in 8 feet almost. We're gonna take this, we're actually gonna shrink it down a bit. And I know I'm giving up a little bit more of what I'm looking at, but it's gonna give me better resolution on top of the shallow side, and that's more important to me right now. That's a rock right there. That is awesome because it's inside the veggies and more importantly on the very outside edge, as you can see back here. Otherwise, we're just gonna try and keep the boat right here on this transition so we get a little bit of the best of both worlds. If I can get it probably 15 to 20 feet, I'm gonna feel a lot better about maximizing my potential here. A lot of vegetation through here. I don't know what kind it is yet. I know it's typically pond cabbage out here. If I could find some milfoil, very hard to find out here this time of the year, especially in the Lakes region, New Hampshire. They do a pretty good job of limiting it. Then that would be great. Otherwise, go through, mark it, mental note, we'll come back, we'll pick through it a little bit, especially when the sun comes out and I can visually see what it is I'm fishing. Just need a good pair of polarized sunglasses. I love my Waterland laydowns. They are phenomenal. I've been with Waterland now for 3 seasons, 0 complaints, love them, cannot recommend them enough. If you're interested, code is ReelNorthern, R-E-E-L, ReelNorthern, get you 15% off on your order. Didn't actually mean to do kind of a little promo thing there, but you know, it's one of those, like, I'm never one that's ever done that. And if I talk about something that I really enjoy, I've proven since the beginning of this channel that I talk about it because I believe in it, not because I'm getting paid to talk about it. So trust me, they're good, they're worth your money. One other point that I failed to bring up when it comes to side imaging that is extremely important, 3 to 5 miles an hour is your optimal speed when side imaging. I try and typically go like 3.5 to 4 miles an hour. I'm still getting incredibly good, crisp returns on everything, while also trying to get as much water covered in as short a time span as possible. So 3.5 to 4 miles an hour to me is ideal. I have done pretty well when going at say 5 miles an hour, but I will typically reserve that for when I've got this spread out like 150 feet per side, and I'm out side scanning like deep water, trying to find individual rock piles, boulders, anything like that. Something like that, something big, really, really nice, hard return because it's hard packed, or just in this case, it's a rock, right? Doesn't get any harder or more dense than that. You're gonna get a really strong return. So even if you're going 5.5 miles an hour, you're still gonna see it. You're not gonna see it great, but it's good enough that, yep, I see it, mark it, come back to it, look at it later. Now, you can see endless sea of vegetation where you got all that hard white returns, but you got some shading behind it. That right there, that is the kind of thing that I really wanna find. That is unique in this otherwise endless sea of vegetation where nothing really stands out. That does. That's the kind of thing you want to look for when you're going over an area that seemingly just doesn't seem to hold anything unique. One other thing about side imaging, a lot of this is about returns and gaps. Returns is anything really, really bright. Gaps is anything black, shadow. That's where the sonar literally cannot see because there's something obstructing it until it can ping off the next structure behind it. In this case, if you want to get an idea if any of this is not uniform, where you got some higher sides than not, all these black spots in here, all that shading, that is where the sonar cannot see until you get behind it. So food for thought as you're going out here trying to find something I just talked about, right? I found that one high spot because I drove over the top of it. Otherwise, how else would you find it? You gotta look for things like that. Over here, you got a little shading behind there. So I'm going to take, and I'm gonna mark that one because that looks a little taller. It's kind of in the middle of everything, so I'm not really sure how I feel about it, but you know, it's one of those, you never know until you go through and fish it. But as far as vegetation goes, side imaging, sonar, I know by sonar, I've got all this hairy return. Over here in the down imaging, you can literally see all the individual strands of it. Again, you've got kind of that hairy return right below the boat, so you can see it's more vegetation. And then out here, it gets darker because it drops off, which we can confirm by looking at where we are relative on the map. And that's why you're getting kind of a shady return back here because it's dropping off so far that the sonar is unable to return back to the transducer. But right there, that looks like a rock to me. So we're gonna mark that, and that's a come back and verify with 360. Ooh, more importantly, we came off the edge right there from about 15 feet down to 25, and right there, that's fish. So that's good to know. I'm not sure what that is because when you turn, you start to lose a lot of resolution on your side imaging because it's not coming right back at where it hit. You're kind of pinging at an angle, so it's coming back at the transducer in a different spot. Everything looks fuzzy. So really, side imaging, you got to be straight line on your boat to get the most out of it. But I'm going to say that this is very encouraging that there's fish down here on the outside. I'm not sure if that's bait. It almost looks like it because I'm not quite seeing as much grass. I'm seeing some individual strands, so that very well could be bait. But there's a fish there. There's another fish in there. It's kind of harder to see, but there's a very dark reddish purple, very, very broad return line. So that to me tells me a fish. Otherwise, there's a lot of what looks like particulate floating, which is all this stuff up high. That could be the result of some of this vegetation starting to die off. So kind of don't get too caught up in that because it's so consistent and this looks like it's going to stretch on for quite a while. That could either be fish, or in this case, given the time of the year and the conditions, that's particulate from vegetation and other things dying off and starting to break off and float up. That is fish, so that's good to know. If I could see him down here, that would be great, but it looks like he was directly below the boat, maybe here or here. Hard to tell on the side imaging, but the sonar tells me that was a couple of fish. Again, no idea what they are. We'll come back with the forward facing, see if we can't pick up one or two. It's all about management on that. Like, how many are you willing to stick that you don't interfere with your potential catchings for the tournament? Tough thing to balance. At this point, it's gonna be much more sporadic as I look at very specific examples of what it is I'm trying to find. Like right here, that is a log. Nice and straight, really strong return, and you get a little shading off the backside, so what the heck, why not? We can get chicken feed on that again. This is another log over here. Again, nice straight defined line, little shading on the backside. Go ahead and mark that, more chicken feet. Plus side of that, if you look at the map, that's right off. This is all grass over here. It's adjacent to that drop off right at the bottom. It's a little deeper, and specifically also in the depths that I've been having a lot of consistent success. Everywhere I've gone in the Northeast the last month and a half, this is just kind of further making me feel better about what it is I'm looking for, because it's going right in line with a pattern that I already know has been well established in other bodies of water similar to this. By similar, I mean what they have: largemouth, smallmouth, yellow perch, white perch, crappie, smelt, things like that. So really it's the yellow perch that I'm kind of concerned with for right now, because it's been a much more consistent bite for me. And they seem to have been in that 15 to 25 foot range a lot. The bass, even the smallmouth, even when the water was over 80 degrees, they were right up in that shallower water, where typically they'd be out maybe 35 feet down over deeper, cooler water, chasing on smelt. Smelt just have been kind of hard to come by this year. Things shift a little bit, so we just gotta listen to the bass, follow the fish, follow the bait, see what they're telling you, make your adjustments from there. That's why I'm in the depth that I'm at. Yellow perch bite has been key for me, so I'm going to hone in on that first and try to maximize the amount of time that I have. I'm trying to optimize all of my solutions and options based on the information that I already know is going to pan out. If that doesn't pan out, then I can go look for something that has not panned out for me at any other point this season. Might get lucky on this lake. Haven't been here. Don't know how the smelt population is. Literally everywhere else it's been really, really bad, so I'm not banking on it here. That's why we're over here. Plus, largemouth. Again, that's what I'm really focused on. They like to be up shallower. That young of the year, again, everything that was spawned at the beginning of the season that is now grown up to, maybe that size roughly, has all moved up into the shallows, and the bass are just following them. The largemouth, the yellow perch are always up there. The young of the year of all kinds of species. You got bluegill. That's just not easy to find, but more consistent to find. So that's why we're doing this. And after that short break, so what I'm trying to do is locate both largemouth and smallmouth, primarily largemouth, right? Already covered that. But what I'm trying to be cognizant of is the fact that we are in that fall transition, and these fish typically have been out deeper, and they're going to come up shallower at some point. It's always kind of tough to pinpoint exactly when that happens. It varies from lake to lake, depends on the conditions of your region, etc. So what I did was I went up shallow, I checked all the shallow vegetation that I could find around hard cover, didn't really find anything. But right on the very outside of that, where I clearly marked in my side imaging, my 360 and my forward-facing sonar, I could see the very edge of all that vegetation. That's where the bait fish were and some of the bigger fish that I was marking. So, okay, good. That is a start. Ended up breaking off one, but encouraged by the fact that I got something that I'm positive was a bass to bite. So now I'm thinking, okay, again, Lake Winnisquam, big featureless bowl. Like, there's really not a whole lot going on here. So where I did go up shallower, and I was trying to find some of that hard structure, right? Whether it be rock or vegetation, in this case, specifically looking for vegetation, and I didn't really see what was going on up there that I was hoping to see. Then I went up really shallow thinking, okay, you know, again, young of the year, maybe everything pushed up, and I still didn't even see anything up there. Very likely they could have been hiding in the grass. It's not the greatest conditions, but it's not terribly bad either. So not really sure if they just weren't there or if they were tucked up tight and I couldn't see them because they were deep in the vegetation. So I was like, okay, well, if I'm not confident that I am seeing what I want to see up shallow, let's pull it back. Let's go into the next deep hole where easy transition areas where you can find that deeper water from those summer patterns, late summer patterns, where they can easily make a very quick shift from that deep water up to the shallows. And if they're not in the shallows, then you go right back to the deep water. And that's when we're trying to find these like crazy breaks from one depth to the next. As we're going through here, continuing to look around that, what I did find was a bunch of bait fish, and now in this case I found yet another tree, so mark that for future reference, more chicken feet. And I was encouraged by what I saw out a little bit deeper. There's both smelt and alewives in here. And what I'm positive I saw was mostly schools of smelt, and they were just still in that next deeper hole. So, okay, largemouth, probably still not gonna be out there, but that's okay. I hoped to find the largemouth up in that one spot. There's a bunch of other spots I'm gonna look that I'm, you know, fingers crossed they're gonna be there, but double duty. All right, well, smallmouth would logically be in this next step, so let's just scoot out and look at that. And sure enough, I saw quite a few that were probably all close to the one I just caught, was maybe about 2 pounds. So nothing crazy to write home about, but you know, for this high school tournament, these kids, if they can average 2.5-ish pounds across 8 fish, that typically does very, very well for them. So very, very encouraged by what I saw there. But most important thing, how does that relate to electronics and trying to break down a big body of water like this? Just keeping an open mind. Yes, it is the very end of September. Yes, the water temp is probably mid-60s by this point. Let's double check. Now this transducer has been sitting in there for a few hours. 67.4, so high 60s. So it's right on the edge of where they should all be coming out of the deep water haunts and coming up and doing that shallow water bite thing. But the first spot I checked didn't really happen. However, that spot had everything you could possibly ask for that shallow bite. So if that doesn't pan out, then you just move back a step, right? Okay, they haven't followed that shallower fall bite quite yet in this particular body of water at this time of the year. So let's back it off, go back a little bit deeper and see what we can find out there. Now it'd be nice, I mean, I'm marking fish out here. I don't even know what this is. It almost looks like a log. Why not make another chicken foot? I am encouraged still by what I'm seeing. While I couldn't find the largemouth, move out deeper, check some different areas for smallmouth. I normally wouldn't look, but hell, I'm out here, so let's make the best of it. Oh, hell yeah, look at that. So, this is awesome. This is what I really like to see. Rock, right here. You know what, I'm gonna cancel that first, so I'm just saving my time. Chicken foot, another log of some kind. Now we're gonna come back and mark that. That is a beautiful rock adjacent to it. Most importantly, look at all the grass over here on the left. We're not that far away, maybe 100 feet from that edge to 50-ish, so about 150 feet away. That's perfect, right? You're going from that deep water structure where currently I'm seeing the majority of the bait fish and quite a few smallmouth hanging out. There's another fish right there, not that far from those two structures I just marked. And they're very, very close to that shallow water transition. So that's awesome, that's encouraging to see. All right, well, largemouth was a bust this morning, but that's okay. I found a lot of the areas that they have been consistently biting in, literally everywhere else I've been in similar bodies of water. So I'm not gonna hold that against them. There's a good chance that it's just the weather today. You know, this morning it was complete cloud cover and dead calm. Now we've got sun coming in and out. It's got a light little chop to it, so things are different, kind of hope for the best. Now we switched entirely to smallmouth. How do you go about looking for stuff in this big empty body of water, Lake Winnisquam? Anything you can find for structure is going to be key for getting those fish to bite. So coming back to the side imaging, you can see we got back here, there is a ton of exposed ledge. Anything like that, most importantly, at that transition from that shallow shelf breaking down to deeper water, right at that knuckle where it breaks. If you can find any structure just on either side of it, but especially right at that breaking point, this time of the year, phenomenal. Most of the year, it's good. In that warmer water or the really, really cold water, I will shift maybe about 200 feet out off the edge of that. And that's about as far out as I will go. But even if they're not on that break, if there's another shelf down, say, as deep as 60 feet, then you can find smallmouth out there. But as we're talking end of the year here and you're trying to find where these smallmouth are, I look for those steep transitions where at the top, it's gonna be about 15 to 20 feet. Because at that point, you're really close to the thermocline, and the fish are very close to that depth anyway. So as everything starts to cool down a little bit, thermocline comes up a little bit, those fish are gonna come up from their deep water haunts, they're gonna follow it up along with all the bait, and they're gonna go to that first transition before the water's prime for them to really get up shallow and start smoking all the bait fish that are up there. So that's what I've been doing a lot of today. If we go back, I already did a bunch of this so I can make it easier. You know, like we found just a bunch of different rocks and stuff, but you know, none of these panned out yet, but that's okay. I mean, we barely dropped the line. So the important thing is we found a bunch of rocks right at that transition point. So what we're gonna do now is kind of go back through and start fishing through some of this and see if we can't get a few more fish without sticking too many, because again, we're out here scouting for a tournament, so have to balance it. But the most important thing is going back through those points, finding all that hard structure right at that breaking point. Then I followed back up through it with the forward-facing sonar, and I could see the smallmouth. I could see them crashing on bait on the outside and going back in and ducking into the rocks right at that knuckle. And you can tell the difference between, say, like a trout, a pike, a pickerel, and a smallmouth, the way they fit, the way they swim. And did throw a line again a couple of times to some fish, and you can see when it's smallmouth and they're coming up, they'll come all the way up to sniff it, and then they'll follow it down. Sometimes they'll hit it the middle of the water column, or they'll wait till it hits bottom, and it usually takes a few more seconds, and then they'll commit. But that has been very, very good and consistent so far, just like it is every year. But you know, today is no different. Just looking for those transition points as the water temp drops to the lower 70s, high 60s, and just trying to find, you know, they're still out deep a little bit, or they pushed up a little bit, and working that transition, we'll say 15 to 25 feet, is just a great starting point for you to go out there, poke around a little bit, whether you're gonna use your electronics and you can just find them with traditional sonar, or if you have forward-facing sonar, it makes things that much easier, or you just wanna go wet a line, you can do that too, and just fish your way through it. Variety of baits, I go kind of big and really small and very little in between, because either they're looking for a meal or they're feeding up on all those small bait fish, whether it be smelt or alewives, yellow perch, white perch, any of those things. So you're gonna kind of have a multi-purpose attack to it, which is not perfectly phrased, but you kind of understand my meaning, right? You gotta cover all your bases. All right, one more example we're gonna go through together as I continue to kind of explore the lake here with Sean, one of the high schoolers, and figure out what it is we're gonna try and do for the tournament. And I'm looking at the most obvious spots while also considering everything I found everywhere else, and specifically what we found here today so far. 15 to 20, 25 feet seems to kind of be the magic number. This is good because it's got a lot of prolonged areas. There's extensive areas of that consistent depth or near consistent. So that's a good starting point. So let's get up on top of it a little bit. Currently still a little deeper than I want to be at 35 feet. So we'll go in towards the shore a little more. We're gonna work our way up towards that little consistent flat there where it stays the same depth for a decent distance at least. And then we'll come right across the top of it and use side imaging and see what we can't find. And you're gonna find, I think, a few things. Good. I was hoping that this was gonna have at least a couple of boulders. Whether or not anybody's home, don't know. That's the follow-up thing where you come back through and either fish your way through it, scope it, see if anybody's home. Usually you gotta do a little bit of both, because given the conditions, they're gonna go ahead and they're just gonna sit down on the bottom inside the rocks. You won't see them. Thankfully, the few spots we've been through today so far, they've been up off the bottom, so it hasn't been too hard to determine if they're there. Much better than this morning where everybody was on the bottom and it was just difficult to go with. So I'm just gonna go through and mark all of these. They don't have to be perfect, because at that point, I'm either just gonna see it on the 360 or I'm gonna point out with the scope to make sure I got my cast perfectly lined up. Either way, I can make a 360 scope, doesn't matter. You can line it up and make it work. And other than that, that was the only thing that was there. So not really worth it, but at the same time, worth it, right? It's not always going to be, oh, awesome, every single spot I checked had great spots. A lot of it is eliminating water. I don't care where you fish. Like 60+% of the lake is just dead water. And a big part of finding the good spots is eliminating all of the dead spots. So none of this time is wasted. You're either finding something juicy or you're finding absolutely nothing. You can cross it off the map. Don't even ever consider it again. And honestly, that's gonna do it. Like, there's so much more I could go into, but at this point, this is where I'm gonna ask you guys to help me out here for much more specific breakdowns, doing it this way. Looking at the electronics, explaining what it is I'm seeing and why I'm looking for them in different areas. If you want me to focus on different depths, if you want me to focus on different types of bodies of water, smallmouth only, largemouth only, let me know in the comments below, please, and I will happily do that. I was just trying to kind of give a very broad yet somewhat defined approach to how you go about a lake that seemingly has nothing. And with the aid of some electronics, you can find quite a bit out there. And a lot of it's just going to come down to finding what little bit of uniqueness you can find in a sea of otherwise nothingness. So I hope you found that beneficial. Let me know in the comments regardless. Thank you for watching. Greatly appreciate it. Catch you in the next one.